So what if I told you that the undisputed godfather of Western literature, this blind, bearded, battle-hardened Greek patriarch.
Right, the guy everyone pictures.
Exactly. What if he was actually a teenage girl from Sicily who just wanted to, complain about doing the laundry and all the annoying local town gossip?
I mean, when you put it like that, it sounds completely like historical fiction.
It really does. But today, we are basically tearing up the historical map. We're
Yeah.
taking this foundational myth of Western storytelling and subjecting it to this 19th century literary bombshell.
Which is Samuel Butler's theory.
Right. And if it's true, it completely rewrites how we understand the origins of human narrative. So welcome to another deep dive. Today, we are digging into Samuel Butler's hyper-controversial 1897 theory that Homer never actually wrote the Odyssey.
Yeah, and like I said, it sounds like a fringe conspiracy theory when you first hear it. But Samuel Butler, he wasn't just some guy writing in a basement.
No, not at all.
He was a highly educated, prominent Victorian author. He was a translator who literally spent years living inside the text of the Odyssey.
And we have a pretty phenomenal stack of sources to dissect today for this deep dive. We're looking at historical analyses of the epic's impact on modern language. We're pulling apart the actual text of the poem.
Both the original Greek translations and the English adaptations, right?
Yes, exactly. And most crucially, we're examining Butler's own prefaces and his explosive book, which is called The Authoress of the Odyssey.
So the mission here for you, the listener, is to really trace this detective work. Butler claimed this young Sicilian woman mapped this massive, sprawling mythological epic directly onto her own literal backyard.
Her own hometown.
Right. And then she secretly wrote herself into the story as the character Nausicaa. So we're going to explore the physical evidence Butler claimed to have found in the geography, the psychological evidence in the characters, and the structural evidence hidden in the poetry itself.
Okay, but to really appreciate the absolute audacity of what Butler was trying to do, I feel like we have to start with the sheer weight of the target he was aiming at.
Oh, absolutely. Claiming Homer didn't write the Odyssey is not just some minor academic quibble.
No, it's a seismic disruption. I mean, the Odyssey isn't just a story, it's basically the architectural blueprint for almost everything that came after it in Western literature.
Right, it's the famous 10-year journey of Odysseus, or Ulysses, depending on the translation, struggling to get back home to the island of Ithaca after the Trojan War.
While navigating vengeful sea gods, fighting literal monsters. And meanwhile, his wife Penelope and his son Telemachus are back home fending off this mansion full of, violent suitors who are trying to usurp his kingdom.
It's the ultimate original hero's journey.
It is. But what really fascinated me in our source material is that the impact of this poem isn't just structural for storytelling. It's incredibly linguistic.
Yeah, it fundamentally shaped the vocabulary you and I use every single day.
Even the word Odyssey itself. Our sources note that the name Odysseus derives from the Greek word odyne, which translates to pain and vexation.
Which, that is incredibly fitting for a character whose defining trait is endurance through suffering.
Yeah, exactly.
But the linguistic tentacles, they just go so much deeper than that. Think about the phrase siren song.
Oh, right. Yeah, we use that all the time.
We use it constantly to describe something that is irresistibly tempting but ultimately destructive. And that is a direct lift from the scene where Odysseus sails past the mythological sirens.
Because he knows their voices compel sailors to steer their ships right into the rocks.
Right, so he orders his crew to plug their ears with beeswax. But his own curiosity is so intense, he just has to know what it sounds like, that he has his men tie him to the ship's mast.
Leaving his own ears unplugged.
Exactly. He wants to experience the temptation without paying the legal price.
And that specific imagery is so unbelievably potent that it has survived for nearly 3 millennia. You see it repurposed by Dante in the 14th century, and you see it literally adapted into the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. It's everywhere. We also still use these poetic descriptors that Homer invented just to make the story memorable. Phrases like wine-dark sea or rosy-fingered dawn.
Right. Those are what classicists call Homeric epithets. And it's really vital to understand how oral storytelling actually functioned back then.
Because it wasn't a book, right?
No, the Odyssey wasn't originally a text you sat down and read in silence. It was an oral performance, sung from memory. And the poet had to fit the story into a very strict rhythmic meter called dactylic hexameter.
So it's essentially ancient freestyle rapping. You have to keep the beat going no matter what.
Precisely. If the poet needed a few extra syllables to finish a line about the ocean, They couldn't just stop and think about a new adjective. They had this mental toolbox of prepackaged, metrically perfect phrases.
So wine dark sea just fit the rhythm perfectly in that moment.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that these ancient mnemonic devices, they've become high literary art. Modern writers are still completely obsessed with them.
Like who?
Well, Derek Walcott, for instance, the Nobel Prize-winning poet, he heavily utilized those exact epithets in his Caribbean epic Omeros. And Patrick O'Brien named one of his Aubrey Maturin novels The Wine Dark Sea back in 1993.
Wow, so the ancient rhythm is literally still dictating modern book titles.
It really is.
And then you have the idioms that evolved but kept the exact same conceptual DNA. My absolute favorite example from the sources is between a rock and a hard place.
Oh, yeah, that's a great one.
Before the 20th century, the standard way to express being trapped between two terrible choices was saying you were caught between Scylla and Charybdis.
Which is a dilemma straight out of Book 12 of the Odyssey.
Right. Odysseus has to navigate his ship through the Strait of Messina, which is that narrow channel of water separating Sicily from the toe of Italy's boot.
And on one side of the strait is Scylla, which is this horrifying six-headed monster living in a cliffside cave, just reaching down to snatch and eat sailors right off the deck.
Terrifying. And then on the other side is Charybdis, this underwater monster that sucks in the ocean to create a massive ship-swallowing whirlpool.
And you can't avoid both. You literally have to choose which way to steer the ship and just accept the losses.
Yeah. And the sources actually mention that as recently as 2021, the U.S. Naval Institute was publishing strategic articles titled Sailing Between Scylla and Charybdis.
So the military's still using the 2,700-year-old metaphor.
Exactly. But for the general public, the language shifted a bit. Around the early 1900s, the American Southwest mining industry popularized between a rock and a hard place, dealing with the physical realities of moving heavy ore.
Yet the conceptual framework of that impossible dual threat is entirely Homeric.
Entirely. And the same thing happened with the phrase in the lap of the gods. I was actually looking at the translation history on this one.
Oh, really?
Yeah. In the original Greek, Telemachus describes things beyond human control as being on the knees of the gods.
Which is a very literal physical image, right? Like placing an offering on the lap of a seated statue in a temple.
Right. But it wasn't until a guy named George Chapman translated Homer in 1616 that the phrase was tweaked slightly through in the lap of the gods. And that translation just stuck so hard that we still say it today whenever we have to surrender control of a situation.
It's amazing.
So we are establishing this massive, basically untouchable pillar of culture. The Odyssey is literally the air we breathe in Western storytelling. And here comes Samuel Butler in 1897, this prominent Victorian intellectual, claiming it's all a geographic and biographical lie.
Yeah.
I mean, I have to admit, it feels like claiming Shakespeare's plays were written by a bored teenager working at a Renaissance coffee shop.
It is absolute literary heresy.
Yeah.
And Butler knew he was poking a hornet's nest. But the thing is, he didn't just arrive at this theory overnight.
Right. He didn't just wake up and decide to be controversial.
No, he spent years producing his own meticulous line-by-line translation of the epic. He wasn't a casual reader. And as he dug into the text, he started noticing these severe anomalies.
Things that didn't add up.
Exactly. Things that shattered the grand pan-Mediterranean illusion that everyone had just accepted for centuries.
Okay, I really want to look at how he broke the map, because the traditional reading of the Odyssey is that Odysseus is just blown all over the known world.
Right.
Like, he goes to North Africa, he sails to the terrifying, mythical edges of the ocean where the dead live. It is supposed to be this vast, terrifying, global adventure.
And that is the absolute bedrock assumption of Homeric scholarship. But Butler took a completely different approach. He decided to treat the text not as a vague myth, but as a literal physical chart.
Like a real map.
Exactly. He mapped the geographical features described in the poem, the specific shapes of the harbors, the prominent mountains, the distances between land masses based on the rowing speeds mentioned in the text.
Wow, he really did the map.
He did, and he realized that once Ulysses reaches the general vicinity of Sicily, the grand global journey suddenly shrinks dramatically.
Yeah, our sources highlight that Butler characterized the core of the journey as a periplus, which I had to look this up because it sounds incredibly technical.
It is a bit obscure, yeah.
A periplus isn't just a general voyage, it's a very specific ancient Greek navigational log. It's essentially a coastal survey, a document detailing the landmarks you see as you hug the shoreline and just circle a specific landmass.
And that distinction is critical to his theory. Butler argued that Ulysses isn't crossing vast oceans. He is doing a highly localized periplus around the island of Sicily.
Just going in a circle.
Yes. The journey originates in a town called Trapani on the west coast, circles the island, and ends right back at Trapani.
That's wild.
He traces the route explicitly. He says they pass via the Lipari Islands, head down through those dangerous straits of Messina we just talked about, swing around the island of Pantelleria, and eventually sail right back into the home port.
So the epic decade-long quest to cross the known world is basically just a guy doing slow, agonizing laps around a single Italian island.
According to Butler, yes. And he was so convinced of this that he actually traveled to Sicily himself to prove it. He walked the topography.
He went on a field trip.
He did. And he claimed that the magical opulent land of the Phaeacians, which is where Ulysses washes up naked and tells the story of his adventures, and the rugged island of Ithaca, which is supposed to be his home in Greece, are both just thinly veiled descriptions of Trapani.
Wait, he's saying the author used the exact same hometown to double as two completely different mythical locations in the story?
Yes. Butler pointed out that the deep harbors described in the poem, the specific offshore islands, and the prominent shadow of Mount Eryx matched Trapani flawlessly.
That's incredibly specific.
He even published a detailed map of Trapani in his book, literally overlaying the fictional Ithaca onto the very real Sicilian street grid in harbor, just to show how perfectly they aligned.
Okay, if we accept that for a moment, it completely changes the psychological profile of the author.
Also,
Well, we are no longer dealing with a well-traveled, worldly poet who is synthesizing tales from 100 different ports. We are dealing with someone who has an intensely hyper-local worldview.
yeah, it implies the author was basically staring out their own window and projecting high mythology onto the mundane geography of their everyday life.
Right, think about a modern equivalent. It's like someone writes a sprawling intergalactic sci-fi novel. You're reading about the lava sector and the ice planet and the treacherous asteroid belt.
Okay, with you.
But then you look closely at the map in the front of the book, and you realize the author just perfectly traced the transit system of their local neighborhood. Like, the ice planet is just the local hockey rink.
Right.
The lava sector is the pizza place down the street, and the asteroid belt is that terrible intersection with all the potholes. The storytelling is brilliant, but the inspiration is entirely domestic.
That is a fantastic analogy. And if the geography is limited to the immediate vicinity of this one Sicilian town, a massive domino falls.
Because of the timeline.
Yes, and the geography. The blind poet Homer supposedly lived hundreds of years earlier, thousands of miles away in the eastern Aegean Sea. He wouldn't know the exact shape of a specific harbor in western Sicily.
So who in Trapani had the motive, the intimate local knowledge, and the absolute literary genius to pull this off?
And this is where Butler drops the second and far more provocative bombshell. He argues that the author was not a grizzled, blind patriarch singing of war. He claims the author was a very young woman living in Trapani.
A teenage girl writing the foundational text of Western literature.
Exactly.
And not just writing it anonymously. Butler claims she pulled an ancient Hitchcock cameo.
Yes.
He believes she secretly wrote herself into the story as the character Nausicaa, the young Phaeacian princess.
To understand why Butler was so convinced of this, we need to do a close reading of Book 6 of the Odyssey.
Okay, set the scene for us.
This is the famous scene where Ulysses washes up on the shores of Scheria, the land of the Phaeacians. He is the sole survivor of a shipwreck. He's completely battered, caked in sea salt, and stark naked.
Rough day.
Yeah, he crawls into a pile of leaves in the bushes and just passes out.
So not exactly the glorious entrance of a conquering hero.
Far from it. Now, the narrative cuts away to the local palace. The goddess Minerva visits the young princess Nausicaa in a dream.
Okay, here we go.
But Minerva doesn't deliver a grand prophecy. She doesn't command Nausicaa to prepare for a divine visitor or arm herself for battle. Minerva tells her that she needs to get up and do the laundry.
I was reading the English translation of this section, and it is startlingly mundane. Like,
Yeah.
Minerva basically says, look, you're at an age where you might get married soon. You can't have dirty clothes lying around.
Right.
You need clean outfits for yourself and for the people who will attend your wedding. It's literally a divine intervention about domestic chores.
And Nausicaa's reaction the next morning is wonderfully grounded. She goes to her father, King Alcinous, but she doesn't mention the marriage part of the dream because she's a bit embarrassed.
Naturally.
Instead, she pivots to how the laundry affects him.
The Butler translation of her dialogue here is amazing.
Yeah.
She says, Papa dear, could you manage to let me have a good big wagon?
A wagon, yeah.
I want to take all our dirty clothes to the river and wash them. You are the chief man here, so it is only right that you should have a clean shirt when you attend meetings of the council.
She is actively managing her father's political image to secure the family vehicle.
It's so funny. Dad, you have a big meeting. You need a clean shirt. Let me take the station wagon.
It's brilliant daughter-to-father diplomacy. And Alcin S. sees right through it, but he gives her the wagon anyway.
Because he's a dad.
Right. So Nausicaa and her maids load up the dirty clothes, pack a picnic lunch, and head down to the river. They wash the clothes, lay them out on the rocks to dry in the sun, take a bath in the river themselves, and then they start playing a game of catch with a ball while they wait.
And this is where the two plot lines collide.
Exactly. The ball goes errant, splashes into the deep water, and the maids all scream. The noise wakes up the naked, bruised Ulysses in the bushes. He breaks off a leafy branch to hold in front of himself and steps out of the wilderness.
Try to picture the psychological reality of this moment. A massive, scarred, filthy man emerges naked from the woods.
The maids, understandably, panic and run away. But Nausicaa stands her ground.
Wow.
Minerva grants her courage, but it's clear the text is emphasizing her natural poise. Ulysses is terrified of scaring her further, so he doesn't approach her. He stands at a distance and delivers an incredibly careful, flattering speech.
He essentially asks, are you a goddess or a mortal? Because if you're mortal, your parents must be incredibly proud, and whoever marries you will be the luckiest man alive.
He is working his rhetorical magic to survive.
Yeah, he knows what he's doing.
And Nausicaa's response is the crux of Butler's argument for the authoress. She doesn't swoon. She doesn't panic. She evaluates him with cold, practical logic.
What does she say?
She essentially says, you seem like a sensible person who has just had a run of terrible luck. We are the Phaeacians. I am the daughter of the king, and since you are in our territory, we will feed you and clothe you. Yeah. Very practical.
She orders her maids to come back, hands him some fresh clothes from the laundry pile, and tells him to go wash the salt off himself in the river.
She handles a volatile, potentially dangerous situation with the efficiency of a project manager.
Yes.
But the detail that really locked Butler into his theory is what happens after Ulysses is clean. He comes back looking like a god, and Nausicaa is impressed.
Right.
But she doesn't invite him to ride back to the palace with her. She explicitly forces him to walk a fair distance behind the wagon.
Because she is terrified of the local rumor mill.
I want to read the exact quote from the text because it literally feels like it was written about a high school cafeteria, not a Bronze Age kingdom.
Go for it.
She tells Ulysses, I am afraid of the gossip and scandal that may be set on foot against me later on, for the people here are very ill-natured, and some low fellow, if he met us, might say, who is this fine-looking stranger that is going about with Nausicaa? Where did she find him? I suppose she is going to marry him.
And then she says, it would be a good thing if she would take herself off and find a husband somewhere else, for she will not look at one of the many excellent young Phaeacians who are in love with her.
It is a stunningly specific articulation of social anxiety. She is worried about being, subtweeted by the town gossips.
Exactly.
She is acutely aware of the jealousies of the local boys she has rejected. Butler read this entire sequence, the focus on the laundry, the father-daughter dynamic, the practical handling of the stranger, and the overriding fear of local scandal.
Right.
And he simply could not compute that it was written by an old, battle-scarred male poet whose previous hit was a poem entirely about spearing people in the neck at Troy.
He looked at the priorities of the scene.
Exactly. The narrative priority isn't martial glory, it's domestic order and social reputation.
Mm-hmm.
Butler argued that the author was projecting her own lived reality, her own family dynamics, and her own anxieties onto Nausicaa.
Okay, I hear the argument, but I have to aggressively push back here. Isn't this just a massive insult to the concept of imagination?
How so?
Well, the argument seems to be. This female character is written so authentically, with such realistic domestic concerns, that only a woman could have written it. Doesn't that completely dismiss the power of empathy?
That's a valid point.
Male authors write spectacular, complex female characters all the time. Leo Tolstoy wasn't a 19th century Russian socialite, but he wrote Anna Karenina. Gustave Flaubert wasn't a bored provincial housewife, but he wrote Madame Bovary.
Right.
Are we really saying a genius poet in 700 BC couldn't simply imagine the anxieties of a teenage girl?
And that is the exact counter-argument that classicists have hurled at Butler for over a century. Equating a character's authenticity directly with the author's biology is a very dangerous literary game.
It feels reductive.
It does. However, Butler's defense is that his theory doesn't rest on Nausicaa alone. He argues it is a cumulative pattern woven into the very fabric of the entire epic.
So you're saying the totality of the poem is heavily biased toward female agency and domestic logic.
Yes. Look at the macro structure of the Odyssey compared to the Iliad. In the Iliad, women are largely prizes or victims. The narrative engine is male ego and physical combat.
Right, it's all about Achilles' pride.
Exactly. But in the Odyssey, female characters dictate the plot. Penelope is not a passive damsel. She is actively matching wits with 100 violent men, using the domestic act of weaving and unweaving a burial shroud to stall them politically.
And the obstacles Ulysses faces are overwhelmingly female, too. Calypso holds him hostage for 7 years.
Yes.
Circe, a powerful witch, turns his men into pigs. Even the goddess Minerva is the true grandmaster of the entire plot, constantly moving the pieces on the board.
Butler noted that men in the Odyssey are frequently portrayed as foolish, greedy, or helplessly violent, like the suitors or Ulysses' own mutinous crew. The women are the strategic thinkers. Butler felt that the sheer volume of domestic detail, the precise descriptions of how beds are made, how meat is carved, how clothes are washed, pointed to an author whose daily reality was steeped in the management of a large, wealthy household, not a military encampment.
Okay, so if we accept Butler's premise that our author is a brilliant, observant young woman managing an estate in Sicily, she has a massive problem.
What's that?
She hasn't fought in a war. And if Butler's map theory is correct, she hasn't traveled the world either. So how does she generate 24 books of epic poetry?
That leads us to Butler's structural analysis of the text. He realized that the author didn't invent everything from scratch. He believes she built a Frankenstein's monster.
A Frankenstein's monster?
Yeah. He argues that the Odyssey, as we hold it in our hands today, is not a single organically unified story. It is 2 completely separate poems that were aggressively and sometimes clumsily stitched together.
I want to break this down because understanding the mechanics of how a text is stitched together is fascinating. What are the 2 separate poems?
Butler categorizes them like this. Poem 1 he titles The Return of Ulysses. This is the high fantasy adventure track.
Okay, the classic stuff.
Right. It includes the Phaeacian episode with Nausicaa and the massive flashback sequence in books 9 through 12 where Ulysses sits at a banquet and narrates his encounters with the Cyclops, the Lotus Eaters, the Sirens in his journey to the underworld.
Basically the greatest hits of Greek mythology, the stuff you see in all the movies.
Right, that's poem 1. Poem 2, on the other hand, he calls The Story of Penelope and the Suitors.
Okay, how is that different?
This poem is entirely grounded in domestic and political reality. It takes place in Ithaca and focuses on the suitors eating the estate into bankruptcy, Penelope's psychological warfare to hold them off, and crucially, Telemachus, the teenage son, taking his first nervous voyage to mainland Greece to find out if his father is alive.
So you have a magical adventure script on one hand and a tense political family drama script on the other.
Exactly.
How does Butler prove they weren't originally meant to be one continuous story?
He looks at the architectural foundation of the poem, the opening invocation to the muse. In the ancient tradition, the poet tells the audience exactly what they're about to hear in the first few lines.
Right, they set expectations.
So the opening of the Odyssey asks the muse to sing of the man who wandered far and wide, the man who suffered greatly on the sea trying to secure his own life, and the return of his shipmates. It explicitly asks for poem 1, the return.
Which makes total sense.
But it doesn't deliver that. After a brief 79-line setup in Book 1 showing Ulysses trapped on an island, the narrative violently shifts gears.
Wait, it just drops him.
Yes. We spend the rest of Book 1 and all of Books 2, 3, and 4 completely abandoning Ulysses. We follow Telemachus and Penelope dealing with the suitors. We don't get back to Ulysses and his actual sea journey until Book 5.
So the poet says, "Sing to me of the guy lost at sea," and then spends 4 entire chapters talking about a real estate dispute back home.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Butler argues that this isn't just a complex narrative detour. It is an abandoned structural scheme. He points out that 2/3 of the entire epic is ultimately dedicated to Penelope, the suitors, and Telemachus.
That is a huge chunk.
Right. The muse was asked to sing of the return journey, but the vast majority of the text is building toward a violent locked room climax in a dining hall that the opening lines never even hinted at.
Think about this like an architectural renovation on an old house.
Okay.
You have this massive, grand, load-bearing wall that's poem 1, the sea voyage, but the owner decides they want a massive new sunroom and a modernized kitchen. That's poem 2, the Telemachus and Penelope drama.
I like this.
So they rip out the original wall and force the new addition into the floor plan. If you look closely, you can see the drywall patches where the new structure doesn't perfectly align with the old foundation.
That is the perfect analogy, and Butler claims he found the most glaring drywall patch in the entire text. He believes you can see the exact spot where the authoress tried to hide the surgical seam between the two poems.
Oh, wow. Where's the patch?
It revolves around the Council of the Gods. Early in Book 1, there is a summit on Mount Olympus. Minerva stands up and begs Jupiter to finally let Ulysses go home.
Okay.
Jupiter says yes and decrees that the messenger god Mercury should be sent to Calypso's island to order his release.
That's the inciting incident, right? The gods set the plot in motion.
Right. But remember, right after that, the poem cuts away to Telemachus for 4 books.
Oh, okay.
When the narrative finally cuts back to Ulysses at the beginning of Book 5, what happens? The poem opens with another Council of the Gods.
Wait, another one?
Yes. And Minerva stands up and basically gives the exact same speech, asking Jupiter to let Ulysses go.
Hmm.
And Jupiter agrees again and finally actually sends Mercury.
Wait, they just run the exact same scene twice?
Yes. Butler argues that this second council in Book 5 was newly written by the authoress to replace the original one.
Oh, I see.
He believes she took the original inciting incident, ripped it out of Book 5, and moved it to Book 1 to serve as a fake umbrella introduction to justify sticking the Telemachus subplot in the middle.
That is wild.
So the repetition in Book 5 is her clumsy attempt to pick the narrative thread back up after ignoring it for thousands of lines.
Okay, I have to pause here because while that structural argument is incredibly compelling, we do have to account for how ancient oral poetry actually works.
Fair enough.
I was looking into this, and repetitions weren't always mistakes or stitches. These epics were performed over multiple days at massive festivals.
Right.
So if you were a guy in the crowd who got drunk and missed day 1, the poet had to reestablish the plot for you on day 2. Repetitions were basically the ancient equivalent of a previously on the Odyssey television bumper.
That is a very fair point, and modern scholars heavily debate whether these duplications are signs of multiple authors or just the practical realities of oral performance.
It could just be a recap.
It could be.
Hmm.
But Butler didn't buy the performance excuse. He felt the patch was too obvious, the themes too disparate, and this leads to his final, most aggressive critique. If this young woman is stitching things together, where is she getting all the filler material? He says she relies on sampling. She borrows heavily from the Iliad.
Butler called it oversaturation, right?
Yes, he argued the authoress was obsessed with the Iliad. She basically had it memorized. And because she lacked the life experience to write original battle scenes or heroic similes, she constantly sampled lines and poetic structures from the Iliad and just dropped them into the Odyssey.
Like a modern music producer taking a classic drum beat from the 70s and looping it under a new pop song. It sounds good, but the foundation is borrowed.
Exactly. And Butler claimed that recognizing this heavy sampling solves many of the Odyssean puzzles that confuse classicists.
What kind of puzzles?
Well, whenever a metaphor feels clunky or a description seems weirdly out of place for the situation, Butler says it's because the young authoress took a line from the Iliad that described a bloody battlefield and tried to force it into a scene about a dinner party in Ithaca.
I really want to dig into a specific example of this clunky writing because this brings us to what I consider the most hilarious and revealing part of Butler's entire theory.
Oh, yes.
The paunch full of blood and fat controversy.
It is an incredible case study in how literary analysis can go completely off the rails.
Okay, setting the scene here. We are in Book 20 of the Odyssey. Ulysses has finally made it back to his palace in Ithaca, but he is disguised as an old beggar.
Right.
He is lying awake in the hallway, listening to his enemies, the suitors, partying in his house. He is tossing and turning, gripped by anxiety, trying to figure out how one man can slaughter a room full of armed nobles.
It's a very tense moment.
Very tense. And to describe his restless tossing, the poem deploys a metaphor.
Now, in his 1897 book outlining his theory, Butler provides his translation of this metaphor. He translates it to say that Ulysses was tossing and turning like a paunch full of blood and fat cooking before the fire.
A paunch, meaning an animal stomach, like a haggis or a blood sausage.
Yes. The poem is apparently comparing the great hero Ulysses to a sizzling blood sausage rolling around on a spit over an open flame.
Wow.
And Butler seized on this single sentence as definitive, absolute proof that the author was an amateur and certainly not the noble genius poet who wrote the Iliad.
Right.
Butler explicitly wrote, "No great poet would compare his hero to a paunch full of blood and fat."
I mean, from a Victorian perspective, I kind of get it. You expect a classical hero to be compared to a roaring lion or a ship weathering a terrible storm. Comparing him to greasy breakfast meat lacks a certain dignity.
It completely violates the expected decorum of the epic genre. Butler used this sausage metaphor as a cornerstone argument to prove the authoress was domestically focused, amateurish, and prone to bad writing.
But here is the massive twist that reveals the danger of this entire enterprise. Butler actually changed his mind over time.
Wait, he backed away from the authoress theory?
Never. But he changed his mind about the translation of that specific line. A scholar named Henry Festing Jones wrote a preface to the 1921 edition of Butler's translation. And Jones points out a vital, almost embarrassing discrepancy. Just 3 years after publishing his bombshell theory, Butler published his full, complete prose translation of the Odyssey in 1900.
Right.
And in that new book, he translated the exact same passage differently.
Let me look at the notes.
Okay.
The 1900 version reads, Ulysses tossed about as one who turns a paunch full of blood and fat in front of a hot fire, doing it first on one side then on the other, that he may get it cooked as soon as possible.
Do you see the difference?
Oh, wow. He's not the sausage. He is the man cooking the sausage.
Exactly. The Greek text isn't comparing Ulysses to the meat. It is comparing Ulysses' restless, agitated mental state to a hungry man who is impatiently spinning a roast over a fire, just desperate for it to cook faster.
That changes everything.
And Henry Festing Jones Riley notes in his preface that this second comparison is actually brilliant. It is vivid, highly relatable, psychologically astute, and absolutely something a great poet might write to convey intense impatience.
So Butler built a massive chunk of his foundational argument on the premise that the author was writing clunky bad metaphors. Only to realize a few years later, oh wait, the author didn't write a bad metaphor, I just translated it poorly.
Yes. It is the ultimate example of confirmation bias. Butler approached the text with a rigid, predetermined theory. The author is a young, inexperienced woman who doesn't grasp the high nobility of epic poetry.
Right.
Because he held that belief, when he encountered ambiguous Greek grammar, he unconsciously translated it in the clunkiest, most undignified way possible. He essentially manufactured the evidence he needed through his own biased translation.
Think about how modern that problem is. Think about how often you receive a text message from someone you're currently annoyed with. You will read their completely neutral text message in a sarcastic, aggressive tone of voice in your head simply because you are primed to expect it.
That is so true.
Butler did the exact same thing, but with a 2,700-year-old ancient Greek manuscript.
It really proves how heavily the translator acts as a co-author. But, to Butler's credit, even when he realized his translation error and corrected it in 1900, he never abandoned his core thesis.
No, he stuck to it.
He still believed the structural stitches, the hyper-local geography of Trapani, and the psychological domesticity of Nausicaa all pointed to the young Sicilian authoress.
So we have this sweeping, meticulously argued theory published at the dawn of the 20th century. He maps the geography, he psychoanalyzes the characters, he deconstructs the poetry.
Right.
What was the fallout? Did the academic world just explode?
Actually, the academic world essentially met it with a collective shrug.
Really?
Yeah. In his 1900 preface, Butler himself noted, with a mix of pride and frustration, that his arguments appeared without rejoinder from critics.
Without rejoinder. Meaning the traditional classicists didn't even bother to debate him.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
The establishment of Victorian Homeric scholarship was a deeply entrenched boys' club. The idea that a translator was attempting to strip the authorship of Western civilization's founding text away from the legendary Homer and hand it to an anonymous teenage girl from Sicily was viewed as eccentric, if not outright absurd. They largely just ignored him.
Which is a real shame because whether he is objectively right or wrong about the authoress, his method is incredibly valuable. He refuses to treat the text as an untouchable religious relic.
Exactly. And that is the ultimate value of Butler's work. And I think the main takeaway for you, the listener, anytime you're consuming stories today, Butler teaches us how to read actively.
He really does.
He forces us to look for the structural seams, to question the hyper-local geography hidden under the myth, to analyze the hidden biases of the characters. He reminds us that texts are not forged by gods. They are built by human beings with very specific local anxieties.
It's the idea that a reader isn't just a passive vessel. You are collaborating with the text. Whenever you read a novel or watch a movie, you are hunting for the ghost in the machine.
Right.
You are looking for the creator's hometown disguised as an alien planet. You are looking for the author's personal trauma spoken through the mouth of a knight or a wizard?
Yes.
Butler looked at the Odyssey and saw the ghost of a practical, brilliant young Sicilian woman who was just worried about the laundry.
The text serves as a mirror just as much as it serves as a window into the past.
I love that.
And it leaves me with this final, really provocative thought for you to ponder. If a foundational myth of Western civilization, a story that gave us our language, our concepts of the hero's journey, our entire narrative DNA,
Yeah.
if that could theoretically be the secret autobiography of a young Sicilian woman hiding in plain sight for 3 millennia, what is happening right now?
Oh, that's a great question.
What massive internet folklore, what viral creepypasta or urban legend that millions of people share online is actually being crafted by some ordinary person in a basement who is secretly writing their own high school drama into immortality?
It makes you wonder, whose Nausicaa are we reading today without even realizing it?
Exactly. When you look at the map of your world, maybe it's not as fixed as you think. Maybe you just need to look a little closer at your own backyard. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.